Alright guys, so welcome to my beginner level React tutorial. In this tutorial we're going to be creating a to-do list. Now this is probably one of the most common first React projects that most people do, and the reason why is because it's really simple. There's multiple parts to it, so you can have to-do lists and you can have a to-do item. So you'll see what I mean by that in a minute. So it gives us the ability to have multiple components and also keep it very simple. So that's why it's a very popular first project. So we're going to go ahead and create a to-do list using React, and I'm going to go over all of the details as we go. So let's go ahead and get started. So I'm going to include in the description videos to install Node.js and Node Package Manager for each operating system. So if you don't know how to install NPM in Node.js or you don't already have it installed, go ahead and watch those videos and come back, and then we'll go ahead and get started from here. So what you want to do is open up a terminal window and go to wherever you want to install your React project. And you're going to want to type in, let's type in npm install, and what we want to install is global. We want to install it globally. So -g space create hyphen react hyphen app, create React app. So click enter here, and it's going to install this. Now I've already got it installed, so I'm not really sure. Yeah, so it's going to say I've already got it installed. So once you have that installed, we're going to go ahead and create the React app. So you're already where you want to create your app. So go ahead and type in create React app, and then the name of the app, which in our case is to-do tutorial. Go ahead and let that finish, and then when that finishes, we're going to actually go into that directory, so give that just a moment. Okay, now that that's finished, we're going to go ahead and type in cd, which means change directory, and we want to go into the directory we just created, which is going to be called to-do tutorial. So now that we're in there, I'm going to clear my console, and I'm going to type in npm start, which is going to start a server up with the app. So give that just a second, and then this window will pop up. All right, and you can see that our app is now working. Now let's open up our code editor. I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code for this, and let's see exactly what is going on here. So I'm going to open the folder, open folder, and I'm going to go to To-Do Tutorial and select that folder. So let's see exactly what's going on here. So in the public folder, we have an index.html file. This is what we're looking at, except React is doing some magic here. You see there is a div right here with the ID of root. Now everything in the app is being generated by React and then injected inside of this div here into the DOM. So let's go to the index.js file, which is inside of the source folder. Let's take a look and see what this is doing. So we have a React DOM.render, and we're taking some sort of HTML element, which we'll get to in just a second, and we're injecting it into whatever the second argument of this render function is, and that just so happens to be get element by ID root. So we're grabbing that document.get element by ID root, we're grabbing that element, and we're injecting whatever app is into that. So we could actually come in here and put a div in here that says something simple like hello world. And when I save it, you can see that now all we have is just a simple div with hello world. And that's being, if we right click inside of here, go to here, you can see it's inside of that div that we were looking at inside of the index.html file. So in essence, that's all React is doing, is it's taking all of the components that you create, compiling them down, and then injecting it into a single element in index.html. That's really all it's doing. Now there's some magic while you're developing, and we'll get into that, but really, in essence, that's all React is doing here. So let's go ahead and get started deleting some of these files. So we're not going to use the app.test.js file. We'll go ahead and delete that. Now let's go inside of the app.css, highlight all of it, and then delete all of that and save it. Now inside of here, go ahead and delete this entire app function. And what we're going to do is actually use a class instead. And we're going to say class app extends react.component. And whenever we use a class that extends react.component, we need to have a render function. So we'll create a function called render, and inside of this, we have to return something. In our case, we're going to return some HTML. So inside of the return, we're going to put a div here, and we're just going to say hello from the app component. And let's see what happens when I save this. Nothing. And the reason why is because we're actually injecting this div instead of the app. So the way this works is when we have a component like this, we can actually take that component and use it like it's an HTML element. So let's go ahead and put the app in there, save it, and now you can see hello from the app component. So the first thing that we're going to want to do is we're going to want to create some components. Now the app component is what we're going to use to essentially house all of our child components, such as the list items and the list itself. So let's go ahead and right click the source folder and click new folder. And you want to type in list. We'll type in to-do list. And then inside of there, we want to create a file called to-do-list.js. There we go. And then we want to create another folder inside of source called to-do item. And then in here, create a file called to-do item.js. And now we have a couple of components here, but we need to do some imports. So I want you to import React from React. Go ahead and go to your to-do list file. Import React from React. We need this in order to extend React.component. And we're going to create a class called to-do list that extends React.component. All right. And below that, we're going to say export default to-do list. So now we can import this in other files. And remember that we have to have a render function that returns something. I messed up. There we go. So we're going to have a render function that has to return some HTML. And here we'll just do another div. And inside of this div, we'll say hello from the to-do list component. Save that. And I'm going to actually copy this entire file. And you want to go inside of your to-do item and paste this. And then wherever you see to-do list, just replace the word list with item. All right. So now let's go ahead and take and import these into our app.js. I'm going to remove this import of the logo, and you can actually delete this too. It's just the React logo. And it says that it failed to compile because there's a reference to it and we deleted it. So we need to save the app.js file after deleting the reference to it. And now you can see it compiles again. So inside of our app.js file, what we want to do is we want to go ahead and import both our to-do list and our to-do item files. So let's say import to-do list from, and then it's going to be or actually it's just going to be // so it's the current directory we're in, and then you want to do /to-do list /to-do list. And then we're going to do the same thing with to-do item. So import to-do item from, and then /to-do item /to-do item. So now we have both of these imported. So let's take a look at actually using them. So if I go in here and I say to-do list, and I just put it in like it's an HTML tag inside of the return, and I save it, you can see it says now hello from the to-do list component. But what if I try to put another one? What if I say to-do item? Let's see what happens when I save it. It says it failed to compile. And the reason why it failed to compile is because you have to only return one element inside of the return. But here's the thing, you can create a parent element, like a div for instance, and then put multiple elements inside of this container. As long as there's only one outside element, you can put as many elements as you want inside of this parent element and it will render like this. So now you see hello from the to-do list component and hello from the to-do item component. So we're going to be using the local storage that's built into JavaScript in the browser in order to save and get to-dos that we actually are using within the app. So what we want to do by default is just see if we have any to-dos that we can go ahead and grab. In order to do that, we can use a function that's actually built into React called component did mount. And what this is it's basically just going to get called whenever the component is rendered and then put into the DOM. When the component is rendered and put into the DOM, the component is considered to be mounted, and whatever's inside of component did mount will actually run. And there's several of these hooks. You can actually go to React's documentation and see things like component did update, component will mount, etc. There's tons of these, so you can take advantage of these within your application. So for now, we're just going to use component did mount, and what we want to do is just see if there's anything in the local storage about to-dos. So let's say const to-dos is equal to local storage.getItem, and the item that we want to get, we'll just end up calling to-dos. And we will set that equal to to-dos, and we'll say if to-dos. So in other words, if we have to-dos, we're going to do one thing. If we don't have any to-dos, we're going to do another thing. So for now, what I want to just simply do is console.log, and then in here I'm going to say has to-dos, and then I'm going to log the to-dos. Otherwise, I'm going to just simply log no to-dos. And let's see what happens in the log here. We have no to-dos, and that's because we have nothing inside of the local storage. So what we really want to do is we want to update the state of the component with the to-dos that we have. Now, here's the thing. So inside of the class, we can create a constructor just like a normal JavaScript class. We have to call super, which is the parent's constructor. We call that, and we can create something called state. And this state is an object. And inside of here, we can create properties for this object. And in our case, let's just do something, we'll say to-dos, and we'll make it an empty array. So now we have these to-dos. What exactly is this state thing? Well, whenever state gets updated, it's going to re-render what's ever inside of here with the updated state. So if I were to come in here and say something like, if I were to reference the state inside of to-do list, and then we were to add a to-do, it would re-render it with the new to-do in there. So how can we actually utilize this? Well, we can actually utilize JavaScript within our HTML by using an open and closing curly brace. So inside of here, what I'm going to do is I'm going to say 2 + 2, and I'm going to save it. And now you're going to see that it gives me 4. And the reason why it's doing that is because it's rendering this JavaScript before it puts it into the DOM. So this is really helpful because it allows us to use JavaScript basically inside of HTML, which is one of the most powerful reasons to use React. So a quick aside, whenever we use local storage, we can only put into local storage a string. And when we get it out, it's still going to be a string. So before we put an object inside of local storage, we are going to have to turn it into a string. So in order to do that, we can use a method called json.stringify. And in order to get it back out, when we get that item back out, it's going to be a string. So we would have to create an object from that string, which we can do using json.parse. So let's just say in this part, we happen to have some to-dos. We would have to first parse it out. So we would say const to-do. Actually, we don't want to use the same variable. We'll say const saved to-dos is equal to, and then json.parse. We want to parse the string. We want to parse to-dos. And now saved to-dos will actually be the object or the array of the to-dos that was stored originally as a string. So now that we have these to-dos, we want to go ahead and update our state. We want to update our to-dos part of the state. So in order to update the state, we can actually update any section of the state that we want. We would use a method called this.setState. Now, one thing that I want you to keep in mind, and you don't have to worry about it for this application, but setState is actually an asynchronous function. So when you use setState and you update some state and then you try to console.log this.state directly underneath it, it's going to log this.state before it's done setting the state. So it's asynchronous. So just keep that in mind. So in order to update the state, we'll simply pass in an object to this function. So this.setState is a function. We're going to pass in an object. And inside of this object, we're going to say, which part of the state do we want to update? Well, we want to update the to-dos. What do we want to set the to-dos as? We want to set it equal to saved to-dos. So we'll save this. But see, we don't have any to-dos, so how are we actually going to be able to see this? We're going to need to create another component, and we'll actually call this, let's create a new folder inside of source. We'll call it add to-do. And inside of here, we'll create a new file called addtodo.js. And then when you're inside of here, you can do this stuff again, where you just copy from any one of these files and then paste it in, and then just replace the stuff with the current class that we're actually going to be calling it, which in this case is add to do. So class add to do extends react.component, and we're going to say add to do. So we're going to export add to do, and we're just going to say from the add to do component. So we can just make sure that it's working. Now let's import it. Import add to do from add to do /add to do. Now let's actually render this component out really quick. Let's say add to do. Save it. Now you can see hello from the add to do component, so we know that it's working. Now what is it we want to do with this add to do? Well, simple. We want to create a form, a very simple form that has an input where we can write in a to do, and then it has a submit button that allows us to save the to do. So again, if we're going to have multiple elements, we're going to need a single container. So I'm just going to give it a class. Now in React, we can't say class is equal to, and then, your class name. You have to use something called class name is equal to. And it's the exact same thing as just writing a normal class. So I'm going to give this a class of add to do container. And then inside of here, I want to do two elements. One is an input. Actually, I want to do a form. So let me do a form here. So we'll go ahead and create a form. And then inside of here, I'll add that input. And this will be type equals text. And we want to do an onChange function. So whenever the input changes values, we want to call some sort of function. Well, we can say onChange equals, and then we can put a function inside of these two curly braces here, some JavaScript. Well, we'll actually call a function that we're going to create in just a moment called, we're going to call it, let's just create it now. We'll say update input. Okay. And then it's just going to take the event. So we can actually take the event from the onChange and pass it to our own function called this.update input and pass the event to that. So now let's actually come in here and log the event whenever we type. So each time I type a letter inside this input, it's logging the event itself. So inside of here, we want to below this put a button. We want to do type equals submit. And inside of here, we'll just put the text to say add to do. We'll save this, and now we can see the button is right here. Now we want to create a function for the submitting the form, so we'll say submit to do. And all we're going to do for now is log some stuff. So I'm going to say submit. So for now, I'll just put submit. So when I click it, you can see that it's refreshing the page. And the reason why it's refreshing the page is because it's a form. We really don't want that. So what we want to do instead is we want to prevent the default behavior of the form. So on submit, and just like on change, we're going to do the curly braces, and we're going to put a function in here where we pass the submit event into it, and we're going to say this.submit to do. That added some stuff. This.submit to do. And we'll pass that event into here. And we'll go ahead and accept the event here in the submit to do function. And we're going to say e.prevent default. Now when I save, it appears to still be refreshing. Why is that? Okay, sorry about that. The onSubmit function is actually supposed to go inside of the form. So inside of the opening form tag, that's where that's supposed to go, not the button. I apologize for that. All right, so now when I click add to do, it does not refresh the page, and you can see it's logging the word submit each time I do so. So what we really want to do inside of update input is we want to update the state. So we're going to create a constructor, just like we did in the app component, and we want to call super because we have to. And then inside of here, we're going to create a state object. And we're going to set a to do, and we're going to set it equal to an empty string here. So our state, we have a to do state, and we're setting it equal to an empty string. And whenever we have the update input, what we want to do is update the state. We're going to say set state. We want to update the chunk called to do, and we want it to be equal to e.target.value. So whatever the value of the input is at any current point in time. So when I save this, when I submit, what I want to do is say submit, and then I want to also log this.state so we can see what the state looks like. So when I type in here, I'm going to say take out the trash, and then I'm going to click add to do. And you can see now this is what the state looks like. It's an object with a to do property that has take out the trash as the value. So what do we want to do when we submit the to do? Well, what we want to do is we want to add the to do that we're submitting here. We want to add that to our app component's to do's array. So how can we possibly get the to do from this component into this component? Well, what we're going to do is something that I believe is called component drilling. So what we're going to do is inside of apps.js, we want to have a function that goes ahead and adds items to to-dos. And we're going to say add to-do. That's going to be the name of the function. And this will take a to-do. And it's a function that's just going to say this dot set state. And we're going to update the state to be to-dos. And we're going to set to-dos equal to what we already have in to-dos. So what I mean by that is this dot state dot to-dos. This is the spread operator, which is saying all of the items that's in this dot state dot to-dos. We want to include all of those items, comma, and we also want to include the to-do that's passed in right here. So we're using the spread operator to make this syntax look really, really clean. So all we're doing here is we have a function called add to-do inside of the app file that takes a to-do and then adds it to this array. So that's great, but how do we get the to-do from here into here? What we're going to do is we're actually going to take this add to do function and we're going to pass it into this add to do component as a property. We can pass in properties very easily by just going into the opening HTML tag and then creating a property name, which I'm just going to call add to do function, or FN for short, is equal to, and then some open and closing curly brackets, this dot add to do. So now I'm literally passing in the add to do function that we've created here to this component. And so now when I say submit to do, I can say this dot props. This dot props allows me to access all of the properties of this component, and we can access properties that we've created, and we called this property add to do function. So I'm going to copy it. So it would be this dot props dot add to do function, and we want to pass in e, or actually we want to pass in this dot state dot to do. So let's go ahead and save this, but the first thing I want to do is quickly comment this out, or I'm cutting it, and I want to just log to do just so you can see that it's working. So I'm just going to log it and show you that it's working. So when I type in some stuff here, take out the trash, and I click add to do, you can see that it's actually getting called from within app.js on line 10, which isn't really line 10, but you can see that it's being called from the app.js class, take out the trash. So just remember, what we did a minute ago is we wanted to set the state, where we update the state with the newest to do, but we're also going to want to do something else. So we're going to put in some curly braces here so we can put in multiple statements. We're going to go ahead and do the set state, but we're also going to want to set the local storage equal to the state. But if you remember what I said earlier, and I think I said earlier that we're not going to have to worry about it in this tutorial, I was wrong, we are. We're going to have to wait for this to finish because this is asynchronous. We're going to wait for this to finish before we set the state. So we're going to use async await for this. So we're going to put async here before the argument to do. We're going to put async here, which tells JavaScript, it tells everything, the browser, that this is going to be an asynchronous function. And then we can now use the word await. And when we say await, it's going to basically say wait for this function to complete before we move on. So I'm going to say await this dot set state, blah, blah, blah. And then when that's done, now it's going to do the rest of whatever's inside of this function, which I want to do is local storage dot set item. And I want to set the to-dos item equal to JSON.stringify. We want to stringify this dot state dot to-dos. And so what's going to happen is it's going to wait for the state to update, and then it's going to save all of the to-dos and into our local storage. So just to demonstrate, I'll come under here and I'm going to actually console.log local storage.get item to-dos. We'll actually see what this looks like. So I'll save it. I'll say take out the trash, and then I'm going to click add to do. And now you can see that take out the trash is actually in our local storage. So how are we going to display the list of to-dos that we have? Well, that's where our to-do list is going to come into play. So let's actually come into here and say to-do list so we can use that component within our render function. And let's pass in as a prop to-dos. So to-dos is a prop that we're creating. We're calling it to-dos, and we're going to set it equal to this.state.to-dos. Now, each and every time a new to-do gets added to this list or removed, remember, this is going to get re-rendered, and this is as well. So this to-do list is always going to have the updated list of to-dos since we're using this.state. So let's go ahead and save this and go to our to-do list class. Inside of here, we want to go ahead and the very first thing we want to do is grab that property. So we're going to use destructuring, as it's called, to grab that. So const todos inside of curly braces is equal to this.props. This is literally exactly the same as saying this. Const todos is equal to this.props.todos. But it's easier because say we have multiple items that we want to pull out of this.props. Well, it's really easy because we could say item 1, item 2. It's just an easy way of pulling out all of the items from this.props and setting it equal to a variable name. So we're going to use destructuring to grab to-dos, and we're going to loop through the to-dos and display them. All right, so we're going to get rid of this hello from the to-do list component, and we are going to have a parent container because we always have to return only one item. And I'm going to give this a class name of, we're going to call it, let's say, to-do list container. And how are we going to loop through and return a variable number of items? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to use some curly braces because we can use JavaScript inside of these curly braces. Now we know to-dos is going to be an array. So we're going to say to-dos, and we're going to map each and every single to-do to a div that's going to be displayed. So we're going to say to-dos.map, and if you're not familiar with map, I've got a video. I'm going to put a link in the description that goes over map in great detail so you can really understand how this function works before we move on. So if you have no idea how map works, please go watch that video and then come back. All right, let's go ahead and map. So what we're going to do is we're going to take map, and we're going to say for each to-do, and also we're going to use the index. Let's go ahead and we're going to map each to-do to an element, and this element is just simply going to be a div. Now you know we have to return it, so we are going to have a return here, and we're going to put in a div. And inside of this div, we're going to put some JavaScript. All we want to do is put the to-do inside of this div. And watch what happens when I save this. This is going to be interesting. You can see this warning here. It says each child in a list should have a unique key prop. What this is saying is whenever we loop through and generate a bunch of some sort of item inside of the render function, we need to have a key prop that we pass to it. And in our case, we have the index already. That's why I grabbed it. We can copy that and set the key equal to that index, save it, and now we don't get that error anymore. And now you can see that take out the trash is actually being displayed. So let's add another to-do. Let's say eat dinner. When I click add to-do, now that to-do is now added to the list. Now one thing that's bothering me already is when I click add to-do, the to-do stays there. I want the input to reset. So we will go to add to-do, and then whenever we add a to-do, we want to get rid of whatever text is inside of this input. So let's say ID equals, and we're going to give this input an ID of add to-do input. And then inside of submit to-do, whenever we call this props, this.props.add to-do function, we're also going to say document.getElementById, and we're going to grab the ID here, which is add to-do input, and we're going to set the value of that equal to an empty string. So when I save it, and I come over here and I say add another to-do, and I click add to-do, it adds the to-do and then it clears the input. Now doing it like this where we're using a div is great and all, but let's actually use this to-do item component that we created here. So go into your app.js file and highlight that import for the to-do item and cut it, and go ahead and remove that line and save. And then go into your to-do list, and let's go ahead and import our to-do item into this. Now instead of a div, let's pass in a to-do item. To-do item. And the reason why we want to do this is because we're going to add some functionality to to-do item, where if we click on it, we want the to-do item to get crossed out. So we have a to-do item now, and instead of passing in to-do as in between, we're going to pass it as a property called to-do. And we'll pass the property to-do, and we'll set it equal to to-do, the to-do we're currently on. And so when I save, we're going to get a failure to compile. And the reason that we're getting a failure to compile is because the path is incorrect. So I need to put 2 dots here instead of just 1, since now we're inside of a directory. So I'll go ahead and click save, and now you can see that we're just getting 3 hello from to-do item components. The reason why is because if we were to go into to-do item, all we're doing is simply rendering this div with hello from to-do item inside of it. So let's go ahead and delete that. And then inside of here, we'll go ahead and, as we did in the previous component, destructure. So we'll say const, and then we'll say to-do is equal to this.props. And we will simply come in here and put in some curly braces, and we want to go ahead and put in the to-do. So I save this, and now you can see that it's displaying it. Now we want to also add a click function, so whenever we click on one of the to-dos, it crosses out the to-do item. So in here, we'll do a on click, and I need to do curly braces, not parentheses. Whenever we click on an item, we want to say this dot, that keeps happening, sorry about that. This dot, let's say toggle to do. Let's say toggle to do. So we need to create that function, toggle to do. So whenever we toggle it to do, we're going to want to change it from being default to being complete. So here's something interesting. Right now, what we're doing is we are saving just the simple to-do text inside of the to-dos. In other words, take out trash, eat dinner. We're just using literally the text as the to-dos. Instead, what we should be doing is using objects, where each object has a text, and the text object will be like take out the trash, the text parameter, and then we would have a completed, and that would either be false or true. And it would be an array of these objects instead of simply the text itself. So let's go ahead and make that update. So the very first step to making this update is we're going to come back into here, and you can see where we're updating the state this.state.todos and then to do. Well, for to do, we're actually going to use an object instead of just the to do itself, where the to do item or the text is going to be equal to do, which is this argument here. And then we're going to have a completed, which is going to be false by default, because as soon as you add it, it can't be completed yet. So we're going to save it. Now what we want to do is we want to go ahead and delete all the local storage that we have so far. So if you're using Chrome, go ahead and right click inside of here and click inspect. And then you can go to application here, and then you can see local storage, and you can actually see your local storage here. Now what we want to do is we want to clear the storage. So I'm going to click clear site data. And now when I go to the local storage, you can see it's no longer there, and I can click refresh and we have nothing there. So now that I've got this set up, I want to save over here, and I want to see what happens when I add a to do. So I'm going to say make video, and I'm going to click add to do. And you can see now inside of the local storage, we have the object. We have an array of objects where completed is false and text is make video for the first item. Now we're not able to display it because we're not displaying it properly yet. Let's go ahead and do that. So in order to do that, we'll go into to do item, and we have the to do here, but instead of it just being text now, it's actually an object. So inside of here, we want to say to do.text, and we want to save it. And now we get what we would expect. So when we want to toggle a to do inside of the to do item, we want to basically be able to click it and then set to do.completed. We want to toggle that to either true or false. If it's false, we want it to be true, and if it's true, we want it to be false. So that's great. We can do that within this class right here, but we need it to go all the way out to here so that we can update the to-dos state here. So we are going to have to create a function inside of app.js that we pass to to-do list, and then we're going to have to create a function in to-do list that we pass all the way to to-do item. So let's go ahead and create this here. We're going to say update to do. It's going to take a to do, and we're going to do some functionality here that updates the to do. So in order to update the to dos, all we're going to do is we're going to use a map function. So we're going to say this.state.todos.map, and inside of this, we're going to say for each to do, and we're going to say if to do is equal to underscore to do, then we want to return a new to do, which is going to have the same text. So text will simply be underscore to do dot text, or actually we'll just say to do dot text, and the completed is going to be equal to not completed. So if completed is true, then not completed will be false. If completed is false, then not completed will be true. So it's just flipping this variable around from either true to false or false to true. So if to do is equal to do, then do that. Otherwise, we just simply want to return, so else, we just simply want to return the current to do we're on. So that would be underscore to do. And so now that's going to map it, but we want to set this equal to, we're going to say const new to do's is equal to this. And let's go ahead and come in here really fast and just log. So we'll say console.log new to do's. That way we can make sure we're getting what we expect. But we're not actually calling this function yet. Let's see what this says. It says completed is not defined on line 49. Oh, that's supposed to be to do dot completed. My apologies. All right, cool. So save. Fantastic. So we're not calling this function yet. So we need to go ahead and pass this function into to-do list. So inside of to-do list, we'll say update to do fn is equal to this dot update to do. And then now inside of to-do list, we will have access to that. So we'll say update to do fn. Although we don't really need to do it up here because we're not going to use it inside of the render function. You'll see what I mean in just a second. So we're going to have a function inside of here underneath render that says update to do. And then all update to do is going to do is simply call this dot props dot update to do function. And in this one, we're going to pass a to do to it. And we're going to pass that same to do to the one inside of the parent, which right now is app.js. So now we're going to pass it to the next level, which is going to be the to-do item. So update to do fn is equal to this dot update to do. And so we can save this, and now we can go into the final level, which is to do item. So when we say toggle to do, what we want to do is we want to call this dot update to do, sorry, it's supposed to be this dot props dot update to do, and we want to call it on this dot props dot to do. Whoops. So let's go through exactly what's happening here. So when I click on one of these to-dos, in theory, what's supposed to happen is it's going to call this dot props dot update to do inside of the to-do item. And it's going to pass the to-do, the one inside of props, it's going to pass that to-do into it. So this is coming from to-do list because we're passing it here. That is actually going to call this function, which is this dot props dot update to do function. And we're passing the to-do that we get from the to-do item into it, which is inside of app.js. And then finally, it reaches this point where it then calls the final update to do function and should hopefully log the new to-dos array. So let's try it. I'm going to click on add more to-dos. We get an error. So let's try to fix this error really quick. So the problem here was that instead of calling it update to do, I need to call it update to do function inside of to do item.js, because inside of to do list, we're passing a prop called update to do fn. So it was just a simple typo. So let's go ahead and see if this works. So I'm going to click on make video. Now you can see it's logged, and you can see make video is completed. So completed is now true. Now we're not yet updating the state, so we need to go ahead and update the state with the new to-dos. So I'm going to come in here and say this.set state. And I'm going to set to-dos equal to new to-dos. And I'm going to click save. And let's see what happens when I click on make video. Well, I'm no longer logging it, so I need to probably log it. But in theory, when I log to-dos, or it should be new to-dos, or what I should probably do is let's not log it. Instead, let's just go ahead and cross it out in the CSS. So let's create a CSS file for to-do item. So inside of the to-do item folder, we'll create a new file called, let's call it style.css. And inside of to-do item, we're going to need to import this CSS file. So import, and then in quotes, we're going to just say // so the current directory, style.css, and then save. And then as you can see here, we don't have a class on this to-do, so we need to give it one. We'll just give it a class name, and we'll call it to-do item, and save. And then inside of which I need to, sorry about that, I need to, I don't know why I put the curly braces, it's supposed to be quotes. So to-do item is going to be the class name, And inside of style.css, we're going to use to-do item as the class name. So put a little dot here, to-do item. And we're going to give it a, let's just for now give it a margin bottom of 10 pixels. And we'll save. Now you can see it spaces it out a little bit more. Let's give it an overall margin of 10 pixels, not just a margin bottom. So that's not, there we go. That looks a little better. Let's do a cursor pointer so that you can kind of see that you're hovering over something that you can click. And let's go ahead and add one more class in the case that one of the items is completed. So what we're going to do is, since we can use JavaScript, I'm going to cut this out. And I'm going to add the curly braces here because we're going to want to add a class conditionally based on whether or not the item is completed. So we're always going to want to have to-do item. But conditionally, we're going to put a plus sign. And we're going to want to return something. So we're going to use the JavaScript ternary operator. So we're going to say this.todo.completed. If this.todo.completed is true, we want to go ahead and say we're going to add the completed class. Otherwise, we're simply going to return an empty string. So in here, I'm actually going to put a space. Whoops. I'm actually going to put a space here so that there's a space between to-do item and completed. And I'm going to save it. And we get a bit of a problem. It says cannot read property completed of undefined. That is because it's not supposed to be this dot to do. It's supposed to be to do because we're destructuring right here. So it's to do, not this dot to do. My apologies. So go ahead and save. Now I'm going to right click on this and inspect it. And what we should do, we should be seeing the class, but it looks like it's not. So I'm going to click it again. And now you can see that it has the completed class because I clicked it and now it's completed. So let's go ahead and add the completed class in the CSS. And what we're going to do is text decoration, and we are going to add cross through. I think it might be line through. Yes, line through. And save it. And when I save it, you can see now there's a line going through it. So if I click it again, the line goes away. If I click it again, it comes back. And I can now mark out to-dos and then unmark them. And when I refresh, you can see that they're not yet persisted. The reason why is because we're updating the state here, but we're not actually going in and setting the local storage. So let's go ahead and come in here and make this an asynchronous function, just like we did up here. And then let's await the set state. Let's await the set state. And then underneath awaiting the set state, let's say local storage dot set item. We want to set to-dos. We want to set to-dos equal to new to-dos, or actually, I'm sorry, this.state.to-dos. And then save it. And now let's start changing stuff. So I've marked all of these done except for clean room, and when I click refresh, we get a problem. It says a cross-origin error was thrown. React doesn't have access to the actual error object in development. Let's figure out what's going on here. So this is yet another simple mistake on my end. I forgot to JSON.parse this. So we need to JSON.parse, or stringify, my apologize, stringify. And now we can pass this .state.todos into it. But I'm going to have to clear the storage inside of here because I messed it up. So clear site data. And now let's try saving this. Okay, let's add some to-dos really quick. Take out trash. Eat dinner. And I don't know, make video. All right, let's cross out eat dinner and take out trash. And then let's refresh. And now you can see they are persisted. All right, guys, I hope you enjoyed this tutorial. If you did, please give me a like, subscribe if you have not already, and I'll see you next time.